The application of Four Noble Truths to resolve an initial thought by Venerable Rungruan Papa Saro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patipa. The problem statement: the mind is disturbed by an initial thought. In performing a mindfulness absorption, the mind will be bothered with an initial thought as follows. The Buddha performed the absorption in most of the early day before the enlightenment, typically when encountering with the initial thoughts in the first stage of absorption, and he advised on how to handle an arising initial unwholesomeness thought with a proper liberated thinking.
I, the Buddha, experience various kinds of initial thoughts, so I analyze these initial thoughts into two types, the unwholesome one and the wholesome one. The unwholesome ones are such as those initial thoughts of desire for sensual pleasure, and those initial thoughts of ill will, and those initial thoughts of taking advantage of others. The wholesome ones are such as those initial thoughts of being free from desire for sensual pleasure, with resistance to pleasure response, and those initial thoughts of being free from ill will with forgiveness, and those initial thoughts of not taking advantage of others, with kindness. And by having mindfulness on the arising unwholesome initial thought, then realizing that if letting the unwholesome initial thought to continue, it will be harmful and non-beneficial to life. Then immediately having mindfulness to bring in a proper wholesome initial thought as liberated thinking to suppress the unwholesome initial thought.
The Buddha spends a whole day and night to cleanse all the initial thoughts, and by then the mind is completely free from any disturbing thoughts. It is important to notice that usually the mind will keep on thinking at all times, and since the mind is no self, therefore even in a case of unwholesomeness thinking, we cannot control the mind by forcibly stopping the unwholesomeness thinking directly with meditation power because the mind is no self, but we must have a mindfulness to realize of an arising unwholesomeness initial thinking, then learning to understand that it is harmful, and non-beneficial to life, and then immediately having mindfulness to bring in a proper wholesome initial thinking as liberated thinking to suppress any arising troubling initial thought. The root cause of problem, after the volitional formations of the process of dependent origination, then an initial thought is originated. Therefore before performing an insight observation to see what is happening in an inner mind, all the 5 lower fetters must be completely cleansed both along the course of thought and at the initial thought of the absorption. The objectives: to abandon any arising initial thought, so that the mind will reach a state of absorption. In Buddhism, the initial thought is developed after passing the first round of the process of dependent origination at the volitional formations. That is, after the mind receives a stimulus from the world, and because of assuming a self to be involved with the matter, then dependently to the ignorance, then volitional formations like thinking arise. At this time the mind will start to have an initial thought of whatsoever it is wrongly, and disturbing the mind from being internally steady, and concentrated. In this circumstance, in order to dwell into the inner mind, we have to break the shell of the initial thought, and then getting into the absorption. The primal concern in the mindfulness absorption is to abandon the initial thought by having a proper liberated thinking, by which the selection of the type of liberated thinking to be chosen, is similar to the technique of proper wholesome selection in the abandoning of 5 hindrances in the previous section, such as the 10 perceptions guided as applicable in the 10 Dharma for liberated thinking, so that the mind will have a right perception. And the primal purpose in performing a mindfulness absorption is to abandon the initial thought with proper liberated thinking, and the other stages of jhana will be obtained respectively without difficulty. The objectives of mindfulness absorption are as follows. 1. Learning on how to have a mindfulness to abandon an initial thought with liberating thinking. After then, becoming a master of the courses of thought with no any background noises to disturb an insight observation. 2. Learning on how to empower the mind to become more internally steady, composed, united, and concentrated in absorption, saying to be a mindful with a steady mindfulness. This is a critical mindfulness development to be a purified mindfulness to be used in performing an insight observation with no bias on any arising mental phenomenon, so that the nature will be observed as it really is. The corrective actions of having liberated thinking to abandon an arising initial thought. The Buddha suggested the general 5 ways to handle with troubling initial thoughts as follows.
When a monk is pursuing the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to 5 signs. What are the 5? 1. Here, monks, when a monk is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign there arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then he should give attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome. And when he gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, then any evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With their abandoning, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Just as a skilled carpenter or his apprentice might knock out, remove, and extract a coarse peg by means of a fine one, so too, when a monk gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. 2. If, while he is giving attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, there still arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then he should examine the danger in those thoughts thus. These thoughts are unwholesome, reprehensible, resulting in suffering. When he examines the danger in those thoughts, then any evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Just as a man or a woman, young, youthful, and fond of ornaments, would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted if the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human being were hung around his or her neck, so too, when a monk examines the danger in those thoughts. 3. If, while he is examining the danger in those thoughts, there still arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then he should try to forget those thoughts and should not give attention to them. When he tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them, then any evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Just as a man with good eyes who did not want to see forms that had come within range of sight would either shut his eyes or look away, so too, when a monk tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them. 4. If, while he is trying to forget those thoughts and is not giving attention to them, there still arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then he should give attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. When he gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, then any evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Just as a man walking fast might consider, "Why am I walking fast? What if I walk slowly?" And he would walk slowly. Then he might consider, "Why am I walking slowly? What if I stand?" And he would stand. Then he might consider, "Why am I standing? What if I sit?" And he would sit. Then he might consider, "Why am I sitting? What if I lie down?" And he would lie down. By doing so he would substitute for each grosser posture one that was subtler. So too, when a monk gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. 5. If, while he is giving attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, there still arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he should beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. When, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind. Then any evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. Just as a strong man might seize a weaker man by the head or shoulders and beat him down, constrain him, and crush him, so too. When, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, a monk beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind. Monks, when a monk is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign there arise in him evil unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hate, and delusion, then when he gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, any such evil unwholesome thoughts are examined on the danger in those thoughts, then these unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him and subside, and with their abandoning his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. When he tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them. When, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind, any such evil unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him and subside, and with their abandoning, his mind becomes steadied internally, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is then called a master of the courses of thought. He will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think. He has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit he has made an end of suffering. That is what the Blessed One said. The monks were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words.
Buddhism is a cognitive process of learning the truths of life within nature. When saying any defilement is unwholesome, it is not only because of the Buddha saying so, but we have to investigate on its cause and effect, and to understand of its harm, and it is not beneficial to life. In case when the arising unwholesome feeling is so strong, then we may have to forcibly contain the problem at the moment first, and then we can execute a learning process later. This introspective learning can be summarized as follows. To have a mindfulness with careful attention on some other signs of wholesomeness to liberate those thoughts. To have a mindfulness with careful attention to examine the danger in those thoughts. To have a mindfulness with careful attention to ignore those thoughts and should not give any attention to them. To have a mindfulness with careful attention to the stilling of the thought formation of those thoughts. This learning strategy is typically called suppressing with meditation power, and abandoning any arising emotion with mindfulness. In Buddhist practice, both the meditation and mindfulness are the two important factors that we must have at all times in handling any arising troubling mind.